This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we have a delightful guest tonight, Stephanie Bell, who's been a long-time member of the Alabama State School Board, who's been our school board member here in the Montgomery area for a long time. She's our guest tonight. Actually running for re-election this year, aren't you, Stephanie?
Yes, I am.
Up for re-election. Stephanie Bell, like I said, has been on the state school board since, I guess, 1994.
I was elected in 1994 and sworn in January 1995.
Long time. That's 20 years, Stephanie. You still look young, though.
Well, bless you.
Stephanie grew up here in Montgomery, y'all, and she's one of us in this river region, and she's married a guy who has roots here and been here all his life, John Bell. He's an attorney here in Montgomery, and they have wonderful children. Stephanie, tell everybody about how you grew up here in Montgomery and about John. He's a practicing lawyer here, and y'all children and everything. People like to hear about people's family. And don't take off too long if you got grandchildren yet?
I do have. We have two granddaughters, and certainly when I start talking about my family, especially my children, and certainly my grandchildren,
I'm the same way.
We could go on and on. I know you are. Most people are.
I used to
that
make
way,
fun of people,
thankfully.
Stephanie, who had grandchildren because they want to show you their pictures. That's all they want to talk about until you have one. When you have one, that's all I find myself talking about. But go back to your background, though. You grew up here, went to school at Cloverdale, and
I did. I moved here with my family. They moved here, actually. That's why I'm here. First grade, Mrs. Camp at Bear School, and then they built Danley. I went to Danley. The first day at Danley, we had to take our lunches because the lunchroom was not finished. I stayed there until I went to Cloverdale, and great years at Cloverdale. John, my husband, also attended Cloverdale.
Were y'all the same age and everything?
No, he actually was there from first grade on to the 9th grade. And then I went to Jeff Davis. John and his sister graduated from Lanier. My 4 brothers graduated from Jeff Davis.
You have 4 brothers?
Yes, I do, and it actually has been wonderful. And certainly they taught me a lot. And
are they they live in this area still, most of
well,
them?
I have one who lived here, retired, his daughter, and their 2 sons. She is a prima ballerina. She was a ballerina here for many years with the Alabama Dance Theater, and she has done quite well. And they certainly, with retirement, don't want to miss a performance, and we do visit, and we're thankful they still own property here in Montgomery. But I do have another brother. My youngest brother lives in Helena, which is in my district in Shelby County. I have 2 brothers who live here in Montgomery.
That's
right
good.
Around the corner, and my mother lives here as well, not very far, just right around the corner.
That's great.
And my dad just passed away in June, and he is now we get to visit him, or his graveside, at the cemetery in Montevallo. And
he was a veteran?
Yes, he was a veteran, and so it's a real blessing to have the National Cemetery here and so close. But
Stephanie,
yes.
you and John tell about y'all's children now.
We have 3 daughters. Our oldest daughter is married, and she is an attorney. She's a graduate of Samford undergrad and then the University of Alabama Law School, just like her dad. And then our middle daughter is a pharmacist. She was actually a member of Auburn University's women's national championship track team when she was there, and she is a graduate of the Harrison School of Pharmacy. She is loving her time at this point out in California, but thankfully with television we can watch her singing in the choir at the Presbyterian Church there on Sundays. And our youngest daughter is about to graduate from the University of Alabama Birmingham School of Dentistry, and she is an Auburn undergrad. She was a biomedical sciences graduate, as well as now she's looking at a residency at the University of Colorado, the Children's Hospital in Aurora.
Well, they're doing well.
Well, thank you.
Stephanie, now you were a journalist when you and John met. He was a U.S. attorney?
Yes, he was actually, when we met, I was one of those newspaper reporters, and he told me later that he had decided reporters, he had a stereotype, and I certainly, after having covered the courts.
Had y'all not met before?
Well, my dad actually met John on a flight they had both attended meetings in Chicago, and my dad came home and said, I met the most wonderful young man on this flight from Chicago. And my dad, knowing anyone who knows him, he likes to give tests. And so he knew about John prosecuting the pornography in Montgomery at the time. And actually, he was the one who wrote the first red light abatement law to prosecute pornography. And then he wrote some subsequent laws. But the point there is that my dad met him first. I had seen John as a reporter when I was covering the police beat and the district attorney's office and the courts, most impressed with his courtroom presence. But when my father told me about his character, that made the biggest impression. And I was blessed. We went on one date, and the rest is history. We were married about a year later. Went on our first date in October, married in November.
And both of y'all both from Montgomery. One of the interesting things we were talking about before the show is his family's been here for a long time.
Many
This
years.
building we're in right now where we filmed this show is the Rosa Parks building, downtown Montgomery, on Montgomery Street across from the old, what's the theater across? Davis Theater. But this was the Whitley Theater, you said?
No, this was actually the Paramount.
Paramount.
And many people will remember going to see things like The Sound of Music when it first premiered. But it also was the first air-conditioned movie theater in the country.
Huh.
And it was the first place where Hank Williams actually performed on a regular basis.
Did he?
Yes.
Right
And
here
so
we're sitting.
They also owned the Whitley Hotel. You mentioned Whitley. And they built the Whitley. They also built the Bell Building across the street from where we are right now. And it's interesting going back in the history of the Whitley Hotel. It's just fascinating. Clark Gable, you start going down the list of people, politicians, movie actors. They were among those who stayed. Katharine Hepburn, one story they like
Stayed at the Whitley?
to tell us that they told the cook to the chef she told Katharine Hepburn, cook it so it looks like it's burned on the outside, talking about her steak, but it looks like it's raw on the inside. And so they did. That was what her special order happened to be. But you're talking about governors, presidents, future presidents. It's an interesting history.
No Whitley.
And we have in our home, we have a candlestick, for example, that was made into a light. So I have that, and we have old postcards and other history that thankfully people have shared. But it has been fascinating.
That's great. Stephanie, so you became a mother and housewife after you all married. And you never did your journalism stuff after you?
I became, yes, that was our first child, our son, was severely brain damaged at birth, lack of oxygen. And he lived for 8 months, and I wanted to commit all of the time that I had with him, knowing that his health was, he was vulnerable at that point. But we were blessed with our 3 daughters following John David's passing. And it actually led me into a very focused volunteer life. A lot of it happened to be focused on education. I had covered the courts, I had covered the governor's office, the legislature, and at the time I also covered the state school board, which was interesting. And I never really thought about running myself, but as a volunteer, I actually lobbied the legislature and at the same time fought some pieces of legislation that were horrible.
I was in the legislature doing that.
I do, I remember, and thank you for your service, because I was there writing.
I remember that now.
Yes, and it was a fun time as a writer because there was so much going on. I was a reporter during a time when everyone was talking about education reform, and I can go back without having to go through the files. I have it, wrote about it, so I have it in my head, all the archives about proration and the years that you had to deal with that. It was constant. at that time.
So you were doing volunteer stuff and doing even the lobbying on a volunteer basis for a different
after I was a reporter.
Stephanie, at what point did you decide that you might want to go ahead and run for the school? Let me back up a second. When you were covering, have we always had the same number of school board members? The districts have changed dramatically over the years, but have we always had the same number?
Yes, and it has changed according to, it started out aligned more with the congressional districts,
But how many
it's
numbers?
no longer that way.
It's always been the same.
Yes.
We always had the same number as a congressional
yes,
district.
but we've
right.
also changed, it can be, it would go from elected superintendent and appointed board, and then it switched to an elected board to an appointed superintendent appointed by the board. So many
But your entire time, though, you've been elected, though.
Yes, I have been elected. They've changed the process. One point, after I'd served 4 years, we fired a 2-year college president. And
has it been that long ago since that corruption thing happened at the school?
now, it hasn't been that long, but this one was another 2-year college president who actually happened to be a legislator, and we had a stack of problems that we had to deal with. And we fired this legislator, and then he challenged our election because at one time it was actually not concurrent, where everyone is elected. That was the first term, where everyone was elected at the same time in all of the districts. After that, I served that 4-year term. Then I had to serve a 2-year term and run
this
for a 2-year term.
This was in the 90s, after you first was elected.
And then starting in 2000, it has been the 4-year term. So it was an odd. My district, right after I was elected, it changed not much, just a little bit.
What was it at first? It was almost like a congressional district, wasn't it? Like the second? Never has been exactly like that.
No, not in my case. We went from Montgomery up to Cherokee County, and that was the second remapping. But the first one, when I ran, it actually went up to Calhoun County, Cleveland, Randolph, over to the Georgia border. And now it goes from Montgomery. I have a part of Watauga County, all of Elmore, Chilton, Coosa, Talladega, Shelby. I have in parts of, it's like a smile, in Jefferson County. And so I have school districts that include Vestavia Hills, Hoover, Mountain Brook, Homewood. And I have family members in all of those areas, so it's kind of interesting to see family members, friends. I have a niece who lives in Hoover, and her children attend Hoover schools.
You know, people don't realize that your job really doesn't pay anything either. So you don't, and you can't raise any campaign money.
Well,
there's no way to raise campaign money, is there? I mean,
well, it is interesting. The times when I've been able to go a little bit higher in terms of, for example, the night before the election, I stood against, Mo Brooks and I were the anti-Amendment 1, where that was going to be the largest tax increase in the state's history. We were on a panel on public television statewide opposing that tax increase. And then the next election cycle, I had everybody and their brother and sister opposing me, tons of money, working against me. The next time, after I'd worked so hard to put in place a double dipping ban for those people who were serving multiple jobs in state government and receiving multiple paychecks, but only doing the work maybe of one job. Bottom line is that, coupled with the fact that I was the first to expose the corruption in the 2-year college system, and certainly you can see where I did that in the Pulitzer Prize winning series of articles in the Birmingham News. But there are a lot of people who claim they were part of that, exposing the corruption. But in that election cycle, they put in someone, groups like AEA, spent really what we can find, it's $250,000, and then when you look at all of the other unreported, it's really over $500,000 to get rid of me. So it makes you wonder why people are willing to pay that much money to replace someone, and I have a similar type situation in this election cycle, but it's always personal motivation on the other side, because as you pointed out, ultimately when you receive your check, board members receive $1,200, and it's called an expense allowance. We receive no real salary. Frankly, when I ran for the school board, I didn't know it paid anything. I didn't think about an office. I didn't really care, because I was motivated for a lot of different reasons that a lot of people don't understand. I'm sure with your service, you know that it is a public service, and I have a servant's heart. I'm blessed because of the large family that I grew up in, and again, parents who really instilled that service mentality in me. I served at one point in time, a lot of people don't know this, but I actually taught English to adult Chinese students in Taiwan and lived in Taichung. Went over there by myself, and it was a real blessing in my life. But going back to the current, yes, we don't receive any office space, we don't have any benefits. People think, oh, you're going to retire. No. So my reasons for running for re-election are not what people who might want to put the career politician tag on there. If this is a career, it's probably not a career that most people will want to see.
And I've never known anybody to move from the state school board to another job.
It's rare. Spencer Backus did that after he ran at one point for Attorney General. You probably recall that.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you had Bradley Byrne, who served a very short period of time on the board, jumped to the state senate, and then jumped to, he came in after he had voted, his last meeting, he voted to hire Roy Johnson.
Who Bradley Byrne did?
Yes, I did not. But he came in at the last meeting, made the second to hire Roy Johnson.
So Johnson followed Bradley Byrne on the
No, no, he actually, Bradley was in the Senate the whole time that he had nothing to do with exposing the corruption that he takes credit for, because he wasn't there. But he is one of two who were instrumental in putting Roy Johnson in place as chancellor. Then, when he left to go serve in the state senate, again, that was what he did.
He was
no
on the
longer
school
on the
board.
board.
That's right. Yeah.
He was no longer on the school board, so he couldn't have done anything. The way that he came back into the picture was after it had been exposed, after I'd been working with Brett Blackledge, after the Birmingham News had written a great editorial supporting me, thankfully, when I was seeking some information on contracts, and we ended up, after about the third request, I got a book this thick. And then I was able to get some more, but I already had a lot of that information because good people who could not go public with it were providing a lot of solid information that was indisputable. And there was no way that anyone could question a lot of what was already on paper. So at that point, the only reason why Bradley came back into a nearly $300,000 job,
That's what the president of the junior college, the chancellor makes.
Well, the chancellor at that time, they serve at the will of the board, and they were on contract, but that was what his contract allowed for. It was close with all of the benefits and everything. And that was after, again, logic tells you you can't come into a job and clean up corruption if the corruption's already been cleaned up. And of course, we were working, and perhaps he is referring to the fact that by that time they were dealing with a lot of subpoenas for information. Yeah. And between the time that Roy Johnson left and we were able to fire him, and I was able to, with the help of Betty Peters, we were able to convince the rest of the board that we do have a problem. We tried several times leading up to that, and they finally realized that that was an issue. And after that, we had Thomas Courts, the former president of Sanford, and then he needed to leave. He left. He asked to leave, and Bradley was recommended by the governor, former Governor Bob Riley.
Stephanie, I remember one era, you touched on it, I'd forgotten about this, it really had become very rampant that legislators were put on junior college payrolls all over the state. There must have been a dozen.
Oh, no, there were more than a dozen.
There were more than a dozen?
More than a dozen. It's interesting, I actually wrote about that when I was a newspaper reporter.
It was going back that far?
Yes, that's my history in looking at that.
What years was this then that it had been going on?
That was back as late as early as 78, 79.
So they were putting legislators on junior college payrolls and university payrolls.
They were presidents. They were not just in the little jobs, they were in the bigger positions. And then they started doing that with workforce development type.
And really their
connections.
only job was to try to get money for that junior college.
Well, certainly.
That was their job. I mean, I remember
Mm-hmm.
lamenting about that one day in the legislature. I looked at Jack Venable. I said, Jack, I think everybody up here is on some university or junior college payroll.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are the only ones. They all just put all of us on some junior college payroll, and just so everybody ain't got a special interest. I mean, you know,
Right.
I said, you know, because I was rampant. When I was in the House, I'd look around and I said, Jack Venable had to go home and work on his newspaper, and I had to go do my insurance business. I said, well, these folks, they getting paid by the junior colleges.
And you're double paying because there were other people actually running the institutions, the
Right.
colleges.
Exactly.
And so the point is that I actually wrote about that before
Back
I was
in the
even
70s and
thinking
80s.
it. Yes, but thinking about it, and I have the columns, what we call op-ed, you know, opinion editorials. But it was an interesting time to see that finally somebody understood
How
that.
did it get undone finally?
We voted.
The legislature put a double dipping ban on about 3 or 4 years
Yes,
ago.
but it was the state school board, and we had the votes. We had 4 votes. We couldn't get the main, you know, that number to get a majority, even with the governor, who rarely attends the meetings. But we had 4 votes,
What years
and
was
that's
this
why they
about?
challenged my election. And then I was reelected, and we were able to.
What year is this, Stephanie Ballpark, if you remember? Was it around 2002 or something?
It actually was yes, and it was very impactful. It's actually after that. It was Bob Riley's 2nd term, and the person who they tried to sneak in, it was probably 8 years ago. So it was a time when we really were able to make some changes before the state legislature, and they actually kind of watered down what we passed because we didn't have the votes in the first vote, and that vote was actually up in Decatur, and then we had, thankfully, a majority, barely, to get it in place. And then we had a pretty tough piece of policy.
But now it's law.
Now it's law, and that was actually what pushed it in place.
During your tenure, was that the most controversial? That Roy Johnson thing was flagrant.
Well,
When
and-
did y'all know all that stuff was going on?
No,
Did you
actually,
sense it?
yeah, when I went on the board, and I have all of the articles showing where I started questioning it, even before I was elected as a newspaper reporter. I wrote a series of articles that actually received an award it was a national award from the Council for the Advancement of Schools. Anyway, it was a Case 2 award. You may be familiar with that. And it was one for a series of articles about corruption in 2-year colleges.
What years was this when Roy Johnson was president over there?
Yes, you have a better mind than I do as far as
Dates.
years and dates. Now I can pick this up and I
I'm
can
trying
look
to
at it.
remember what
But
era though it
But
was.
for me, it was an extended period of time, and a lot of people don't understand that it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And there are people who've made campaigns off of it who weren't even there to clean it up and actually help to expedite the corruption and push it more.
It pretty much hurt the junior college system.
Well, it did, and it was already hurting it. It was crippling it, and we had people who were punished for doing the right thing. And it was an interesting time during that whole process when we were finally getting the attention we needed and the focus from the prosecutors. A lot of people didn't know, but there were people walking around with microphones, and it was just interesting. There were documents that were being left at my door. I already had a lot of documents. The financial records from Southern Union, where Roy Johnson had been the president at the time when he pushed someone else out, and some of the homes that were purchased. And it was an interesting process, but that was even before I was elected.
Well, how many school board members are there?
There are 8, 9, including the governor.
Okay, the governor. So 8. Well, he needs to 10 if it's going to be a controversial vote because it gives you an odd number. Otherwise, you might have a 4-4 stalemate.
And that has happened. That's that's what happened with the situation.
In a succinct way, tell our viewers in the last 4 minutes we have what exactly the school board's authority is and what it does. Do y'all set curriculum for the schools?
The state school board actually impacts 4-year institutions. We have to approve all of the programs for the colleges of education. We actually approve the courses of study, what we now call standards, the college and career ready standards. Common Core actually is the big issue in this campaign because it started out as a federal program being pushed, and then they tried to make it sound like it was the National Governors Association that actually, in the Chief State School Officers, they're national standards, and we fought that battle early on. I fought that battle in 1994, 95. So this is kind of a repeat at the national level. All the people who were involved before, Hillary, Arnie Duncan left recently. He's the former Secretary of Education for President Obama. He left saying that it's in place. And it's not a good thing. It's a horrible thing, because we also approve the textbooks, we approve technology, we approve teacher certification for private as well as the public institutions. We have oversight in so many different areas that have to do not only with curriculum and standards, but also with data collection is a really big issue at this point, very intrusive. One last estimate was that perhaps 400 points of information. They will have access with this new bill that has been presented to have a lot of information and names attached to it of children starting very early and going through the workforce. Over the years, we have been the advocates, the State School Board we have been the #1 advocate for workforce development, because we provide education. If you provide a solid education, one of my big, to me, most exciting thing that I've been able to do, among many things, has to do with reading, the reading initiative that other states came to Alabama to look at. Alabama's reading initiative attracted Massachusetts, Texas, Florida, because the results before Common Core, or College and Career Ready Standards, were so great on the National Assessment of Education Progress, particularly in both, actually, math and English, that they were historic. We made more progress during that time in our state's history in education than at any point in any state in the country. So it is, it saddens me to see this change to be like everyone else instead of #1 like in football. But it is happening, and Common Core, also known as College and Career Ready Standards, is creating headaches for teachers who have been in the classroom, the good teachers, the ones that love what they do, talk about at the end of every year wanting to leave, and it all has to do with this new business that is really a national effort. It's not just Alabama. So when you hear about Common Core, there's a lot that goes into it, and teachers on a daily basis are calling me, asking me, we've got to get rid of this. Please, see if you can, and really it will take a majority of the board. I voted against it both times, and we just don't have a majority at this point.
We'll see. Stephanie, our time's up.
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Folks, our guest tonight has been Miss Stephanie Bell, who's a long-time, 20-year member of the State School Board, up for re-election this year, District 3. And we thank you viewers for watching Alabama Politics, and hope you'll tune again next week. And we again thank Miss Stephanie Bell for being on our show. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. So good to thank you. Thank you, Steve.
This has been Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, a production of Troy University Television. Opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of Troy University, its administration, faculty, staff, or students.